Imagine you and a coworker do, well, pretty much the exact same job.
Right.
But over 40 years, you figure out how to do that job, I don't know, 60% faster, better, just way more efficiently.
You're putting out a lot more value.
Exactly. You are generating significantly more value. But then when you look at your paycheck after those 4 decades, it has only gone up like 16%.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It really is. And it forces the question, right? Where did the rest of your money go? Like, who took that massive difference between what you produced and what you actually got paid?
Well, today we are looking at a set of blueprints that claims to know the exact answer to that question.
And it doesn't hold back, right?
Oh, not at all. It names names. It points to very specific structural mechanisms that essentially siphon that value away over the decades.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping right into two companion documents today. One is called the Common Inheritance Charter, and the other is the Restitution Blueprint for Economic Justice.
Two very heavy, very ambitious texts.
Very heavy. And our mission today is to act as your impartial guides through these texts because, I mean, these are profound, sweeping blueprints.
They really are. They rethink everything.
Yeah, and we need to say right up front, we are not here to take a political side today.
Right.
We're not endorsing these views or telling you this is, the absolute gospel truth. Our goal is just to unpack the sheer structural logic and the moral philosophy they present.
Which is fascinating on its own, regardless of where you stand politically.
Exactly. Whether you view this as some utopian dream or a dangerous overreach or maybe the exact medicine society needs right now, it's just a wildly fascinating lens through which to view the modern world.
Totally agree.
So for everyone listening, think about this. Have you ever felt like you're working harder than ever, producing more than ever, yet somehow you're just falling further and further behind?
While the broader economy just seems to be, booming.
Right. Record profits, stock market highs. Well, this blueprint explores exactly why that is happening and, crucially, how it proposes fixing it.
The fixes are pretty radical.
Oh, they go deep. Okay, let's unpack this. Where does the text actually say this grand theft began?
So the documents point to a specific historical inflection point. They call it the Great Divergence.
The Great Divergence, okay.
Yeah. And they date it right to 1979.
Wait, 1979, why then?
Well, to understand the shift, we have to look back at the generation immediately following the Second World War. During that period, there was this foundational covenant in the economy.
A covenant, meaning a sort of unwritten rule.
Exactly, a social contract. And the rule was that as workers became more productive, their pay rose in tandem.
So if I make the company 10% more money, I see a 10% bump.
Basically, yeah.
Yep.
Capital and labor advance together.
A shared trajectory, right, like a rising tide lifting all boats.
Precisely. But that covenant was deliberately broken, according to the text. And they used that exact window between 1979 and 2019.
Okay, what happened in those 40 years?
During that exact window, the productivity of the typical American worker increased by roughly 60%.
60%? That's massive.
It is. But during that exact same time frame, the real hourly compensation of that typical worker, adjusted for inflation and everything, increased by only 16%.
Okay, wait. So productivity climbed almost 4 times faster than wages.
Yep.
That gap is just staggering. I mean, if the workers were generating that much more value and they obviously weren't keeping it, where did it go?
Well, the blueprint doesn't just say it, evaporated into the ether.
Right. Wealth doesn't just disappear.
No, it argues the wealth was produced by the hands of labor and then systematically carried off by concentrated capital.
Carried off. That's strong language.
It is. And they argue that this extraction was actually compounded by what happened to the tax burden at the same time.
Oh, the tax code, of course.
Yeah. While wages were stagnating relative to productivity, the corporate share of federal taxes just collapsed.
How far did it collapse?
Well, back in the 1950s, corporate taxes made up nearly 28% of federal revenue. That was roughly 4.2% of the total GDP.
Okay. And today?
Today, that has fallen to under 10% of federal revenue. It's a mere 1.7% of GDP.
Wow. Under 10%.
Yeah, it's a huge drop.
So just to put that 1.7% of GDP into perspective for a second, if the federal budget was like a neighborhood dinner tab, right?
Okay, I like this.
The biggest, richest corporations at the table used to pay for about a quarter of the meal.
Right.
But today, they're basically tossing in a few bucks for the tip, and they're leaving the middle class to cover the appetizers, the main courses, and all the drinks.
That is exactly what the data suggests, yeah.
So the laborer is paying a much larger share, for the roads, the courts, the infrastructure, all the things that allow those same corporations to draw their profits in the first place.
Exactly. And the text frames the human cost of this divergence brilliantly. They call it the erosion of the domestic hearth.
The domestic hearth, that sounds very traditional.
It does. And they point out that within living memory, a single wage could keep a family afloat.
Right, one income.
Yeah, one income could house a family, feed them, and leave a parent completely free to just raise the children.
Which feels like a total luxury today.
Right. Because that wage was hollowed out by the Great Divergence, it now takes two earners to hold the exact same economic ground that one held before.
Wow. So according to this blueprint, the transition to the two-earner household wasn't purely this, triumphant cultural shift of liberation.
No, they argue that for millions of families, it was basically a forced march just to maintain baseline survival.
It's like, okay, it's like doing a group project in school. Everyone does the research, they stay up late writing, they put in the sweat equity.
Right.
But one person puts only their name on the final paper, gets an A, and then turns around and charges the rest of the group for the ink they used to print it.
That's a great way to put it. And the blueprint states explicitly that this immense strain on the modern family is not some failure of individual work ethic.
Right, people are working harder than ever.
Exactly. It's the predictable fruit of a wage that was stolen across 40 years. The wages were taken, and the means of protesting like unions or basic bargaining power, they were outspent by the very wealth that the theft created.
Man. Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, though.
Before,
Let's look at the titans of tech and finance today. The Steve Jobs and Elon Musk archetypes.
sure.
Sure, maybe the tax code is skewed today, but didn't those innovators build their wealth from their own sheer genius?
That's the classic defense, yeah.
Right. I mean, they took the massive risks. They founded the companies in their garages. Doesn't the state deserve to just step back and let the entrepreneur reap the reward of their own risk?
The blueprint completely anticipates that exact pushback.
I figure they might.
Yeah, and their response is totally unequivocal. They say no great modern fortune was ever conjured out of nothing.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning that the fortunes built on technology, finance, scale, they were as entirely on inheritances that were never private to begin with.
Ah, okay. Like public infrastructure.
More than just roads and bridges. They point to public research.
Oh.
Decades of taxpayer-funded R&D seeded the foundational science for almost everything we rely on today.
Like the internet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Computing, the internet, cellular technology, GPS, even the basic research behind most modern pharmaceuticals.
All publicly funded.
Yes. These were funded by the public, but the resulting fortunes were fenced off and claimed as exclusive private domains.
Okay, sure. I mean, the government funded the early internet and DARPA invented GPS. I get that.
Right.
But the government didn't figure out how to put a supercomputer in my pocket and write a flawless algorithm to connect me to a rideshare driver in 30 seconds, right? The private sector did that.
That's true. The private sector commercialized it. But the text argues they enclosed a commons in order to do so.
Enclosed a common.
Yeah. And beyond just the foundational tech, there's the issue of public education.
Oh, because of the workforce.
Exactly. The engineers who wrote that amazing rideshare algorithm, they were formed largely at public expense. The legal systems enforcing the rideshare companies' contracts, those are public too.
I see where this is going.
But crucially, and this is the big one for the modern era, there is the raw material of the entire digital economy.
Which is data.
Exactly. Our common data, the
Yeah.
speech, the behavior, the daily routines, the social interactions of the entire human population have been harvested, mostly without explicit consent, to train these massive private algorithmic models.
Wow. So they took the public's digital exhaust, trained their private AI on it, and now they basically rent that AI back to us for a subscription fee.
That is the argument, yes.
Okay, identifying the structural capture of wealth is one thing, right? Arguing about tax policy or even data privacy is pretty standard political debate at this point.
That is.
But this text goes much further than that. It claims this enclosure is an undeniable ancient moral crime.
It really escalates the rhetoric.
Yeah. The language they use isn't just about marginal tax rates, it's about sin. So how do they philosophically justify demanding this wealth back?
This brings us to what I call the prophetic register of the documents.
Prophetic register, I like that.
They utilize this incredibly high, statesman-like rhetoric, and they heavily invoke traditional Catholic social teaching and actual scriptural precedent.
Really, like quoting the Bible in an economic plan.
Directly. They cite the biblical parable of the rich fool, for instance.
Brain me, how does that one go?
It's the story of a man whose land yields so much crop that he has absolutely no room to store it all.
Okay.
So he decides to tear down his existing barns and build massive, greater ones. And he tells his soul to just take its ease, eat, drink, and be merry.
Sounds like a successful retirement plan.
Right. But in the parable, God tells him, "You fool, this night your soul is required of you, and who shall those things be which you have provided?"
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The blueprint uses this specific story to warn those who accumulate vast, hoarded wealth while completely ignoring the hands that actually built it.
That is dark.
They also quote the Apostle James, who wrote fiercely that the cries of defrauded laborers have entered the ears of the Lord.
That is intense. I mean, it is not just saying, hey, you are greedy. It is saying you are actively hoarding what inherently belongs to someone else.
Exactly. It's theft.
And they ground all this in the ancient concept of the Jubilee, right?
Yes, the Jubilee is central to their whole framework.
Now, I've heard the word Jubilee used for like a monarch's diamond anniversary or a big celebration, but what does it actually mean in this economic context?
So in the book of Leviticus, the Jubilee is a mandated cyclical reset of the entire economy.
Wait, a mandated reset.
Yes. Every 50th year, a trumpet is sounded throughout the land. And when that happens, all debts are forgiven, period.
Just wiped out.
Wiped clean. And those who fell into bondage or slavery because of their debts are immediately set free.
That is radical.
Gets more radical. The biggest part of the Jubilee is that the land itself is returned to its original families.
Wait, so if you bought land from someone 20 years ago, you just have to give it back?
Yes. It's a massive economic reset button every 50 years.
That is wild. Why would they structure an economy like that?
The reason given in the ancient text is actually incredibly profound. God says, "The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me."
So no one actually owns it.
Right. And the blueprint uses this to argue that wealth, which concentrates over time, must periodically be returned. The whole point of the Jubilee was designed specifically to prevent the formation of a perpetual aristocracy of wealth.
Where the strong just grind the weak into permanent servitude over generations.
Exactly. It breaks the cycle.
So the text is fundamentally challenging the absolute nature of private property itself. It is saying that if I own something, I don't actually own it 100% free and clear forever.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the tradition this text draws upon has never viewed private property rights as absolute.
Really?
Never. It champions a concept called the universal destination of goods.
The universal destination of goods. Meaning what exactly?
It means the earth and all its fruits were given to the whole human family for the sustenance of all, without excluding anyone.
Okay, so private property isn't a blank check.
Exactly. The right to private property absolutely exists. They affirm that.
Yeah.
But it is bounded. It comes with a built-in social mortgage.
A social mortgage.
Yeah.
I love that phrasing. You own the house, but the community holds the paper.
That's a perfect way to visualize it.
Mm.
Over every possession lies a debt owed to the community that made it possible to own that possession in the first place.
And the blueprint extends this ancient agrarian law directly to the modern digital age.
Directly. It states that new forms of wealth, things like patents, algorithms, platform monopolies, and big data, they all fall into the exact same moral law as a physical grain field or a water well in ancient times.
Wow.
They are given for all, and they may not be fenced off entirely against all.
So think about your own data for a second, everyone listening. Every click you make online, every location your phone pings, every photo you upload. The blueprint is arguing this isn't just anonymous exhaust you're leaving behind. It is a digital commons that is being enclosed, fenced off, and harvested as someone else's private property.
And enclosing it, without giving back to the commons, is a moral theft.
Okay. If we accept this premise that the commons have been enclosed and the public has been drastically shortchanged, what is the actual mechanism to return it? Because the text explicitly rejects the idea of mere charity, right?
Oh, it fiercely rejects charity as the solution. The authors argue that charity is bestowing what is your own, but restitution is returning what rightfully belongs to another.
Ah, big difference.
Massive difference. The blueprint demands structural restitution, and the architecture it proposes for this is called the Commonwealth dividend.
The Commonwealth dividend, how does that work?
It runs in two parallel streams. Stream one is the personal dividend. This is an unconditional, regular cash dividend paid to every single citizen simply as a right of membership in the Commonwealth.
Okay, so they model this on the Alaska Permanent Fund, correct? Let's break down how that actually works for the listener, just as a real-world example. How does Alaska generate that money, and how do they hand it out?
Right. So in Alaska, the state constitution dictates that a portion of the revenue generated from oil and mineral leases on state land has to be deposited into a public fund.
Because the natural resources belong to the residents.
Exactly. So the principal of that fund is invested globally, and every year a fraction of the earnings is distributed as a direct cash deposit to every man, woman, and child who resides in the state.
Just direct deposited into their bank accounts?
Yep. It is a working, real-world precedent of a resource dividend. But the blueprint takes this and is absolutely insistent on one crucial design element.
Which is?
The dividend must be completely unconditional.
Unconditional. See, usually in politics, there's this massive, overwhelming desire to means test things.
No constant.
Right. Politicians always want to say, well, only the deserving poor get this, or you only get this check if you are actively enrolled in a job training program. Why does the blueprint ban means testing so aggressively?
The authors argue that the instant a dividend is tied to behavior or employment or some state-defined criteria of worthiness, it instantly ceases to be an inheritance and becomes a weapon.
A weapon.
Yes. It becomes a lever of control that the powerful will inevitably use to discipline the weak. They will constantly redefine who is deserving and who gets discarded.
Oh, that makes sense.
So they argue an unconditional floor is the only kind of floor that cannot be weaponized against the people who stand upon it.
It's the difference between a boss giving you a discretionary bonus at the end of the year, but, only if you smile enough, never complain, and meet all their arbitrary metrics, versus receiving a standard dividend check in the mail simply because you own stock in the company.
Exactly. One makes you a subordinate begging for favor. The other makes you an owner claiming your yield.
That analogy perfectly captures the power dynamic the text is trying to invert here.
And that is just Stream 1.
Right. What is Stream 2?
Stream 2 is the Civic Investment Fund. And this one models more on Norway's sovereign wealth fund.
Okay, so not cash payouts.
Right. An equal share of the recovered wealth isn't paid out in cash. It is invested collectively in our common future. The idea is that one generation's restitution compounds and grows, becoming the next generation's sacred inheritance.
So what does the Civic Investment Fund actually pay for, in practical terms?
It funds a social wage. This is essentially universal basic services. We're talking healthcare, education, public transit, social housing, all provided free or nearly free at the point of need.
So a robust social safety net.
Very robust.
Yeah.
And crucially, it also funds what the blueprint calls the care pillar.
Okay, the care pillar really stood out to me when reading this because it addresses something traditional economics almost entirely ignores.
Yes, the invisible labor.
Exactly. The invisible trillion-dollar industry of unpaid family caregiving.
The labor of raising children, tending to the sick, taking care of the elderly. I mean, this is the most essential labor any society performs, period.
Society literally collapses without it.
Exactly. Yet it is almost entirely uncompensated. It is done overwhelmingly by women. It silently sustains the entire formal economy, and yet it is valued at exactly zero on the national ledger.
Which is crazy when you think about it.
The blueprint argues that treating this indispensable labor as economically worthless is a profound structural injustice. So the care pillar proposes direct support for caregivers.
Like paying people to care for their own kids.
Yes, care incomes, paid family leave, and the direct provision of local child care, elder care. The goal is that no one is ever forced to choose between raising their child or caring for their dying parent and earning a surviving wage.
This sounds incredibly humane, and structurally it sounds very sound, but we have to address the massive elephant in the room here.
The cost.
The cost. This sounds unbelievably expensive. Universal cash dividends, massive sovereign wealth funds, compensating millions of hours of unpaid care.
It's a huge budget.
How on earth is any of this funded without just crushing the middle class with taxes? Show me the money.
Well, the blueprint is highly specific here. It doesn't just wave his hands. It outlines an illustrative budget of roughly $2.3 trillion a year.
$2.3 trillion annually.
Annually.
Yeah.
And it explicitly states this does not come from middle-class income taxes.
Okay.
It is drawn directly from the enclosed wealth we talked about earlier. It relies on a carefully balanced portfolio of 5 main levies.
Break those down for me.
First, there's a land value levy. This generates the largest chunk, about $850 billion.
Okay.
Second, a corporate and automation levy, bringing in roughly $550 billion. Third, a levy on great fortunes, generating about $400 billion.
So far, that's real estate, big business, and billionaires.
Exactly. Fourth is a peace dividend of $265 billion, and finally about $75 billion from leasing the digital and physical commons.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. The biggest chunk of that pie, $850 billion, comes from the land value levy.
Yes.
Now, the blueprint bases this on the economic insights of a 19th century thinker named Henry George.
A brilliant economist.
Can you explain the empty lot versus the city lot example? Because when I read that, it fundamentally changed how I look at real estate.
It's a total paradigm shift.
Okay.
Imagine two identical bare plots of land. Same exact soil, same exact size.
Okay, Kai.
One is located out in the middle of a desolate, completely empty wasteland. The other is located right in the dead center of a booming metropolis like Manhattan or London.
Right.
The plot in the wasteland is practically worthless.
Right.
The plot in the city is worth tens of millions of dollars.
Mhm.
So ask yourself, why is the city lot worth so much?
Location, location, location.
Right, but what makes the location valuable? It is not because of anything the actual owner of the dirt did. The owner might live in another country. They might have let that lot sit empty as a gravel parking lot for 20 straight years.
While the city around it exploded.
Exactly. The value was created because a community surrounded it. Taxpayers built roads and subway lines to it. Millions of people chose to live and work near it. The local police and fire departments keep the area safe.
So the community generated the value, but the owner gets to absorb it when they finally sell.
Henry George called that the unearned increment. The landowner is basically harvesting a crop they never planted. The value of land is created by the presence, the labor, and the public investment of the surrounding community. But it falls directly into the lap of whoever holds the title.
So a land value tax doesn't actually tax what a person builds on the land.
No, not at all.
It doesn't punish you for building a nice house or constructing a new apartment complex. It strictly taxes the underlying value of the land itself.
Precisely.
But wait, what about the classic counter-argument here? What about, the grandmother who bought a cheap house 50 years ago in a neighborhood that suddenly gentrifies?
Right, the gentrification question.
Yeah, if her land value skyrockets because hipsters move in, doesn't this tax suddenly force her out of her home because she can't afford the levy?
The blueprint addresses gentrification directly. Because the land value levy replaces other highly regressive taxes, and because it is paired with that universal personal dividend we talked about, the grandmother is actually receiving a monthly cash infusion.
Oh, right. The dividend offsets the tax.
Exactly. For a modest residential plot, the dividend easily offsets the levy. The levy really falls overwhelmingly on commercial land hoarders, speculative real estate conglomerates, and absentee landlords who are just sitting on vacant city lots waiting for prices to rise.
So it punishes speculative hoarding and actually rewards real productive development.
That's the exact goal, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so if we move to the second stream, the corporate and automation levy at $550 billion, I imagine this is targeted at the big tech firms, right?
Very much so.
So if a company builds an AI that replaces 10,000 human copywriters, this levy is basically saying, hey, you built that AI using our public internet and our public data, so you owe a severance to the commons. Am I understanding the logic there?
You have captured the exact mechanism. The machine that takes the task is not allowed to take the human's livelihood without compensating the commonwealth that provided the platform for that machine to even exist.
It captures the financial gains from displaced labor.
Yes. It ensures automation benefits the whole society, not just the shareholders of the tech company.
And the wealth levy, $400 billion from great fortune.
This is a modest percentage assessment on extreme concentrated fortunes. We're talking about the multi-centimillionaires and billionaires.
So not taxing a dentist who owns a boat.
No. This acts as a structural break against the formation of dynastic multi-generational wealth.
Okay. Then there is the peace dividend, $265 billion. This implies a massive redirection of military spending, right?
It does. The text establishes a very strict moral rule regarding the state's budget. It argues that expanding digital access, funding education, and securing basic provision for every human soul must always take precedence over the manufacturing of new weapons.
Guns versus butter, basically.
Exactly. It views excessive perpetual military expenditure as a gross misallocation of the public inheritance.
Finally, we have the $75 billion from leasing the commons.
Right. This is charging telecom companies for using the public airwaves, or charging big tech companies a fee for extracting and commercializing public data.
All right, let's say I concede that the math works. The money is there.
Okay.
I am now terrified of something else entirely. inflation.
Ah, the inflation question.
Yeah, if you pump $2.3 trillion into the economy every single year, giving every adult roughly $4,000 a year in a cash dividend, doesn't that just cause prices to skyrocket?
It's the most common fear.
Won't the local landlord just see that everyone has $4,000 more and instantly raise the rent by $4,000?
The blueprint vigorously defends against the inflation argument. On the macroeconomic level, inflation generally occurs when a central bank prints new money in excess of real economic output, which just expands the money supply artificially.
Chasing too few goods.
Exactly. But this dividend is entirely funded. It is a direct transfer of existing claims on wealth. It moves already existing money from hoarded corporate vaults and speculative land holdings directly into the hand of ordinary citizens.
So it is a reallocation of existing currency, not firing up the printing presses at the Federal Reserve.
Exactly. Furthermore, regarding the landlord raising the rent, this is exactly why the Civic Investment Fund exists.
How does that stop the landlord?
Well, if you just give people cash, monopoly markets like housing or healthcare will absolutely absorb it. They'll just raise prices. But the investment half of this blueprint actively expands the real physical productive capacity in the critical bottlenecks of human need.
Meaning they build stuff.
Lots of stuff. It funds the mass construction of social housing, expanding public transit, building community healthcare clinics. By drastically increasing the supply of these essentials, it actively exerts a massive deflationary pressure on the cost of living.
Oh, I see. You cannot price gouge on rent if the community has just built 2,000 units of high-quality, affordable social housing right down the street.
Precisely. The new supply absorbs the new demand.
Okay, let's pivot to the governance of this massive system. Because by collecting $2.3 trillion a year, we have just outlined what sounds like the most powerful, centralized financial weapon in human history.
It is a staggering amount of capital.
Doesn't this just create a terrifying, tyrannical a giant, bloated bureaucracy that commands the entire economy?
That is the ultimate danger, and the blueprint is acutely, deeply aware of it. To prevent this, it introduces a vital structural firewall based on another Catholic social principle. It's called subsidiarity.
Subsidiarity. Okay, how does that work in practice?
Subsidiarity is the foundational idea that power and wealth must always, without exception, flow downward to the most local, smallest, competent unit of community.
So neighborhoods over federal bureaus.
Exactly. It should never flow upward to a centralized state if a local community or a family can handle it themselves. The text fiercely argues that centralized state seizure of wealth is a trap that has to be avoided at all costs.
So this is what differentiates the blueprint from, say, traditional Marxist collectivism.
Entirely. Marxism traditionally calls for the total state seizure and command of the means of production. The government runs the factories, the government sets the prices, the government manages the entire workforce.
A command economy.
Right. This blueprint does not do that at all. The Civic Investment Fund acts purely as a passive, highly diversified owner. It holds broad index funds and equity stakes. It is an owner, not a commissar.
Okay.
It shares in the wealth generated, but it does not micromanage the enterprise or dictate production.
That's a huge distinction. But so how do ordinary people actually govern this massive wealth without politicians just, raiding the piggy bank to fund their own pet projects? Because a public fund administered in secret becomes a private slush fund very, very quickly.
It does, which is why the blueprint details several fascinating, highly transparent citizen institutions. First, they propose the widespread use of citizens' assemblies.
Wait, I've heard of these. Aren't they being used in Ireland for big constitutional issues?
Yes, Ireland is the famous modern example.
But how do ordinary citizens get brought up to speed on insanely complex macroeconomic policy without just being manipulated by the quote-unquote experts teaching them?
The mechanism they use is called sortition. It is essentially a demographic lottery, like jury duty. You gather a highly representative assembly of completely ordinary citizens, balancing across age, class, region, race, and profession. And to prevent manipulation, the assembly members themselves get to call the witnesses. They're given ample time months, usually. They get independent research staff, and they have the ability to directly cross-examine conflicting experts.
That is fascinating.
It is. Deliberation among ordinary people, when they're insulated from lobbyist money and the constant pressure of re-election campaigns, has consistently proven far wiser and much more trusted than the purchased political chambers it replaces.
It really is like jury duty, but for macroeconomic policy. And what about at the hyperlocal level? How does subsidiarity work for, like, neighborhood funding?
For the local level, they propose participatory budgeting. This is modeled in a system that originally started in Porto Alegre, Brazil.
How does that work?
It allows actual neighborhoods to directly propose, weigh, and allocate local investment funds themselves. The municipality allocates a chunk of the budget, and the citizens hold local assemblies to vote on whether they need, say, a new health clinic, a paved road, or a community center.
Oh, I love that.
It's brilliant because people fiercely defend what they have built themselves. And a budget that is debated out in the open by neighbors is incredibly hard for corrupt officials to siphon off.
There is one more institution they mention in this governance section that really caught my eye: the guardian of future generations.
Oh, this is such a beautiful concept. This is modeled on an actual existing office in Wales right now.
Wait, really? Wales has this?
Yes. It is an independent governmental office dedicated entirely to weighing every major public decision against its impact on the unborn.
That is incredible.
It acts as a voice in the present for the silent generations who obviously cannot vote today, but who will eventually have to inherit whatever we build or whatever we ruin.
It forces a long-term horizon on a political system that usually only thinks in, what, 2 to 4 year election cycles?
Exactly. It breaks the short-termism of modern politics.
So we have mapped out the economic restitution, the funding streams, and the local governance. But the text makes this pivot, arguing that justice in material goods is basically hollow without justice in truth and communication.
It moves into a very heavy section about reclaiming the digital commons.
Right. It acknowledges that the same powers that enclose the physical wealth also essentially purchase the public square.
Yes, because a people that cannot trust what it is told cannot possibly govern itself.
So true.
So the blueprint establishes a system of severe but highly bounded accountability for deliberate, harmful falsehoods spread by powerful actors.
Now, hold on. Anytime a government document starts talking about accountability for falsehoods, my alarm bells immediately go off.
As they should.
Who decides what is false? Doesn't this just become a literal ministry of truth that polices everyday opinions and cancels any dissenters?
The text is incredibly careful to erect extremely firm boundaries against exactly that fear. The penalty for falsehood only ever applies to knowing lies or a reckless disregard for the truth that cause real, traceable harm to identifiable persons or the general public.
Okay, so it has to be knowing and it has to cause harm.
Exactly. It explicitly states that this accountability never applies to honest error. It never applies to an unpopular opinion or political dissent. It never applies to satire or making a prediction that turns out wrong.
And if what you say is actually true, but people just don't like it?
Truth is an absolute defense. Always.
Okay. So it is not a ministry of truth policing my Twitter timeline. It is more like, well, treating a massive social media algorithm that knowingly pushes harmful disinformation for profit the exact same way we would treat a chemical factory dumping toxic waste into a local river.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it, yes.
Right. You hold the entity structurally and financially liable for the pollution they are creating because they knew the sludge was toxic, but they dumped it anyway to save money or boost engagement.
Exactly. The text also demands that digital platforms act as common carriers.
Like phone companies.
Just like phone companies. A phone company cannot cut off your line just because the CEO disagrees with your politics. Similarly, a massive, monopolistic social network shouldn't be able to arbitrarily silence lawful speech.
They mandate algorithmic neutrality.
Yes, meaning you, the user, get to choose the filters and algorithms that order your attention, not the unseen hand of a tech billionaire optimizing for maximum outrage.
But what happens when someone does cross that line? When a powerful actor knowingly spreads harmful lies and causes real measurable damage, how does the blueprint punish them? Do we just banish them from society forever?
The text commitment to reintegrative justice here is really remarkable. It fiercely, explicitly rejects the permanent cancel culture we see so much of today.
Really? How so?
The justice system it proposes names the wrong clearly, and it requires full retraction and material restitution, including stripping the powerful of their corporate veils so executives are personally liable.
Okay, so serious consequences.
Very serious. But it intentionally leaves the door wide open for the penitent to return. Once amends are actually made, the records are sealed and expunged. The community names the deed, but affirms the ultimate worth of the person. They write that a shame that brands forever makes outcasts, But a shame that welcomes the penitent home makes neighbors.
Accountability without permanent annihilation. I absolutely love that. Okay, rebuilding the digital world is crucial, but the text also outlines a physical and social rebuilding of the social fabric, specifically focusing on the future of work and the youth.
Right, the structural reforms.
Let's look at those. You mentioned the Vienna model for social housing earlier. What are they actually doing in Austria that keeps housing out of the casino? Are they just building giant, dreary, Soviet-style apartment blocks?
Far from it. In Vienna, the municipality owns or directly subsidizes roughly 60% of all the housing in the city.
60%.
Yeah. And because the city controls such a massive share of the supply, it effectively sets the market rate for everyone. Private landlords are forced to compete with high-quality, beautifully designed, mixed-income public housing that has strict rent caps.
So you don't just have housing for the very poor and housing for the very rich. Everyone lives in it.
Exactly. It completely defangs the speculative real estate market because citizens always have an affordable, highly desirable alternative. The blueprint wants to scale this exact model globally.
Amazing. They also propose something called worker co-determination.
Yes. This is based on the German model of corporate governance. It mandates that workers hold direct representation, meaning actual voting seats on the corporate boards of the companies they work for.
So labor actually has a say in the boardroom.
Exactly. It ensures labor has a structural voice in the overall direction of the enterprise. Workers aren't just an expense line on a ledger anymore. They are legally recognized as stakeholders who get a vote on things like executive pay, factory closures, and working conditions.
And what about the youth? There's a whole section in here on national service. I have to ask, why not just institute a military draft if you want everyone to serve the country?
The text is very, very explicit about avoiding compulsion. A mandatory draft would recreate that dangerous trap of conditionality and state coercion we talked about avoiding earlier.
Right, so how do they get people to do it?
Instead, they propose a strictly voluntary, but highly honored and heavily rewarded national service track.
Heavily rewarded how?
Well, if you serve, whether that's in a conservation corps, trade placement, or caring for elders in your community, you receive substantial education endowments, priority placement for that Vienna-style social housing, and lifelong civic honors.
Oh, wow. So you incentivize it so heavily that it just becomes the cultural norm without ever actually pointing a gun at anyone.
Exactly. The ultimate goal is to build a shared culture. By deliberately mixing young people across class, regional, and racial lines in these service cohorts, it actively repairs the social fabric. Honor, the text notes, draws much more durable participation than compulsion ever could.
Now, right after the national service section, the blueprint pivots to something that honestly really surprised me. It goes incredibly deep into radical reforms of child protection services.
It does, yes.
Why on earth is child protective services featured so prominently in a macroeconomic justice blueprint?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture they are painting, it makes perfect sense. The authors argue that a true commonwealth is renewed by forming its people, especially its young.
Okay.
You cannot talk about rebuilding the family economically while completely ignoring the crisis of how the state currently interacts with families in deep distress.
Which is usually through the foster system.
Right. The text condemns the current bureaucratic, paperwork-heavy model of child services, where traumatized children are just processed into facilities by utterly overwhelmed caseworkers.
What is their proposed alternative then?
They advocate for a localized system based on deeply vetted, community-based mentors. When a child must be separated from a harmful home environment, they shouldn't just meet a rotating cast of transient bureaucrats.
No, that just adds to the trauma.
Exactly. They should meet a single, stable mentor from their own actual community. Crucially, the success of this proposed system is measured by human attachment and lasting bonds, not by bureaucratic hours logged or how many forms were filled out in triplicate.
Measuring success by human attachment. What a concept.
They argue that structural safety, having multiple trusted adults and visibility within a local community, is what actually stops predators, not just running another background check form. It is a profound call to rehumanize the absolute most vulnerable point of state intervention.
It all just keeps coming back to treating humans, not as economic inputs or bureaucratic case files.
That is the core philosophy. Yeah.
It is an incredibly holistic vision, but surely the authors don't expect a $2.3 trillion restructuring of the entire global economy to just, happen overnight.
No, they are highly pragmatic.
Yeah.
They outlined a detailed transition plan called the Staircase to the Jubilee.
Staircase to the Jubilee.
Yeah. It acknowledges that a great restoration isn't enacted by waving a wand in a single day. You have to start with the foundation, the easy wins.
Like what?
Implement the land value levy locally. Issue the very first modest universal dividends. Relieve the worst predatory medical and student debt. Enact those basic transparency rules for the digital commons.
Get the ball rolling.
Right. Then, over a generation, you build the walls. You steadily accumulate the social wealth fund. You gradually expand the social wage as the fund yields returns, and you start building the Vienna-style housing block by block.
And then eventually,
Finally, you reach the mature commonwealth, where the dividend is a true, unshakable floor beneath every single life, and the Jubilee becomes a permanent generational rhythm of the society.
so what does this all mean? We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
Synthesizing this vast journey, I'd say we have explored a structural vision that does four main things.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, it identifies a historic, quantifiable theft of productivity and public value that began around 1979. Second, it roots its solution not in some novel, untested political theory, but in ancient moral law, the Jubilee and the social mortgage. Third, it outlines a mathematically backed, highly detailed system of restitution through dividends and levies on enclosed wealth. And finally, it builds strict safeguards, subsidiarity, citizens' assemblies, and unconditional design to prevent this returned wealth from being captured by either a corporate monopoly or a tyrannical centralized state.
It is just a breathtaking piece of structural architecture. I really want to reiterate to you, the listener, what we established right at the start of this hour.
It's important to remember.
Yes. Whether you view this blueprint as a utopian dream, a dangerous overreach, or the exact medicine our society needs, its sheer depth and structural logic make it a profound lens through which to view our current economic reality. It absolutely forces us to ask deep, uncomfortable questions about what we owe to each other.
It demands that we look at the invisible structures that shape our daily lives and recognize that we're built by human choices, which means they can be repaired by human choices.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to explore on your own, building on the source material we discussed today. We talked about the guardian of future generations, that literal office advocating for those who have not yet been born.
A powerful idea.
I want you to think about the resources, the data, the community, and the environment you are stewarding in your own life right now. If you were suddenly summoned to stand before an assembly of people living 100 years in the future, how would you justify the social mortgage you left behind? What barns have you built, and whose grain is inside them?
That is the ultimate question of the Jubilee.
Thank you so much for joining us on this complex, challenging deep dive. Keep reading, keep exploring, and above all, keep questioning the structures around you. Until next time.